I should begin with the sound the key did not make. There was no reassuring click that night, no ceremonial scrape of iron against an obedient lock. Only a breath mine, shallow and guilty, spreading pale in the marble cool air beneath the Sistine Chapel. Had you been there, you might have called it a draft from the stairwell. I called it invitation. My name doesn't matter. I wore the cassock for 13 years, learned the music of silence, the choreography of obedience. I believed a wall was a wall until the night I learned that walls, like words, can be edited. You are listening because some doors should not open. I am speaking because one did. We took our turns in the chapel after midnight, a ritual of presence, of keeping the body near what the church treasures most: images, relics, the hush that earns your faith by refusing to answer. You know the ceiling, of course, because everyone knows the ceiling, though fewer know how it sounds when the hall is empty. A faint, steady settling, as if the painted limbs are exhaling in their sleep. I had prayed my beads thin under those frescoes. I knew every covenant of color and crack. And yet there is a crack no visitor sees, a seam beneath the choir benches along the north side, thumbs smooth with centuries of priests pretending not to touch it. That night, I touched it. It yielded like damp parchment and released a smell I will never scrub from memory. Vellum and limestone and something metallic that did not belong in the air, something like dried blood rubbed into old leather. It came with the soft, traitorous sensation of dust settling on the tongue. Silence wasn't sacred, it was enforced. I worked the seam with an altar key that had no business in a wall. It slid in and snagged bone tight on something that flexed, and then the panel sighed, a relief that was almost human, and swung inward to reveal stairs older than the paint above them. Older, perhaps, than the stones that kept them hidden. I told myself I was doing inventory. I told myself the archive catalog had gaps a helpful man might fill, but sin has a taste before it has a name, and guilt, like lamp oil, clings to everything it touches. The descent was a ration of light, traded for an abundance of cold. Each step unscrolled a little more darkness, as if the chapel were a page being rolled up from the bottom. You think you know night until you meet the kind that lives under churches. The hierarchy of silence changes there. Marble gives way to old noise, and even your breath feels like contraband. When my foot found the packed earth and I turned my lamp, the room resolved as rooms seldom do in dreams, too exact, too obedient to the mathematics of craft. A chamber of low arches, a table of massive oak, chains not many, just enough to confess their purpose dangling from iron staples sunk into the wood. The chains ended in locks. The locks ended in holes. The holes waited for keys that had memorized other hands. A book lay on the table, not bound in the noble modesty of calf or goat, but in a composite patchwork, like a pilgrim's bag repaired too many times. It was not the book that startled me. It was the geometry carved into the tabletop beneath it, a shallow wheel of 12 segments intersected by lines I knew from the sky and the catechism I had never been taught. The familiar circle of the zodiac, yes, but tilted, inverted, skewed, as if someone had argued with the heavens and won. You will say astrology has no place here. You are almost right. It does not belong in the lighted church, the one tourists file through and cameras dignify. But beneath, I learned there is the Vatican that doesn't blink when it stares. And there, the stars are not for wishing, They are for indexing. My hand hovered over the wheel. Latin letters hugged the spokes the way marginalia hugs scripture, apologetically, hungrily, certain you will finish the sentence they begin. Caput Arietis, Custos Draconis, Oculus Leonis, names that are also directions. Names you can stand under if you have the patience to chart where stone meets sky. I opened the book. It did not open reluctantly, like books that are preserved for the dignity of not being read. It opened quickly, as if grateful for the heat of skin. The page hissed a little, the way old vellum hisses when its pores remember weather. I was not prepared for the ink. The color had dimmed into a brown the body recognizes, and the strokes carried that preposterous steadiness achieved by hands that copy and copy and copy until reality itself looks like a clean mistake. They were not psalms. They were not any gospel I had swallowed without chewing. They were tables, dates, angles, conjunctions, columns of numbers that counted the sky and collapsed time into obedient lines. In the margins, a tiny hand, slanted and fierce, combining the shorthand of monks with the impatience of engineers. Remove 3 years here. Normalize feast to new moon. Overwrite eclipse record to match decree. I should have closed it. I should have chalked it up to a curiosity of the annals, a byway of scribes playing astronomy to baptize calendars. But the second page was not numbers. It was a diagram of the Sistine ceiling without figures, a skeleton of geometry, an anatomy of vaults, the lines of pressure and intention that tell you where an artist meant your eyes to go. Along those lines, fine as hairs, faint as breath, symbols sat so gently into the scaffolding that only the scaffolding would confess them. The ram's head hidden between 2 fields of color, the scorpion's tail nested in a fold of drapery, a pair of fish kissing in the thin darkness where paint pretends shadow. Not painted over, no. Painted into. The difference matters. I would learn later that this kind of seeing has a side effect. It edits your past. You begin to remember the misgivings you did not allow yourself when you were young and obedient. And you resent, deeply, that the memory is late. I kept turning pages. There were letters, copies of copies, some so clean the pen might still have been drying when the page learned to be old. They spoke in the guarded voice of men who believe the world will end if they are careless with nouns. On the question of the starry vault, one letter began, as if the ceiling were not paint but predicate. On the matter of erasure, on the acceptable alteration of public time, I had heard homilies that did less to the soul than those dry phrases did to my bones. Brother, the word from the stairwell was a damp feather. It brushed my spine before it found my ear. I killed the lamp. I did it without thought, like a reflex drilled by other fears. Footsteps paused above, considered, then retreated with the practiced patience of men who know every noise a stone can make. I let the dark sit on my shoulders a while. I breathed the air the church had kept to itself. And I reached, blind, for the pages again. The fingertips know what the mind will not admit. Silence wasn't sacred. It was enforced. I wish I could tell you that I left then, that I resealed the wall and took the secret with me and lived out a gentle heresy no one had to punish. But confession, if it is to deserve forgiveness, must preempt excuse. I folded a page. Not the first, not the title, if there even was one. A leaf in the middle, the one with the ceiling's geometry annotated in a hand I would come to recognize in my dreams. I folded it the way a thief with a conscience folds, promising himself he is making a copy for safekeeping, a duplicate for salvation, a spare for the fire that must someday come. I slid it into the lining of my cassock, where flesh keeps paper warmer than ink deserves. You will ask, why you? Why then? Why this door? Because all systems of control have a leak, and leaks do not choose saints. They choose the thirsty. I reseated the book and lifted my lamp again, and only then saw the second wheel carved into the far wall, a twin to the table's zodiac, but misaligned by 3 houses, just enough to make the sky yourself, if you had the arrogance to demand it. The chisel marks around that wheel had the sloppy haste of fear. Somebody had carved in a hurry. Somebody had been interrupted. The candles on the bracket were new enough to shame the dust. I returned to the chapel. I set the panel the way I had found it, though now I knew that things we find are often set for us precisely so we can find them. I prayed a prayer that wasn't one, words kneeling like beggars with counterfeit coins. Then I went back to my cell and did the most dangerous thing a man like me can do. I stayed awake. In wakefulness, the world refuses to accept the edits made for our comfort. The night paced in my bones. I reread the leaf until the geometry imprinted itself behind my eyes. And in the small morning, when the first footfalls of the faithful started their percussive ascent, I heard something I had never heard in that city of bells. The sky clearing its throat. Weeks passed in measures of caution. I learned when the night custodians traded routes, which Swiss guard checked the chapel twice from habit and once from fear, which sacristan knew the inventory by weight, not number. I learned how long a match can burn behind the cupped hand of a man who does not believe in lighter flames near faces on plaster. And then, on a cold evening when Rome misted like breath on a mirror, I went below again. This time I was not alone. He waited by the wheel in the wall, an old man by the ruthless geometry of the underground bones mapped with clarity, eyes filmed with the kind of patience that only men who have lost wars possess. He did not raise his head when I approached, though the lamp pushed tremors of light across his hands. "You have taken a page," he said, as if the ceiling itself had kept score. "I would have recommended the one before it, and not as wide and rastigdated. The word was an oath I could not afford. My mouth closed, monastic on command." He turned then, and the lamp taught his face more shadows than features. "Do not apologize," he said. "Apologies are used to weave the net. Say instead that you were thirsty." "I was thirsty," he nodded. "Good. Then you will survive the first fever." He showed me the shelf I had convinced myself I hadn't seen, the one with the chained books that relied on shame more than hardware. "These," he said, "are not forbidden. They are inconvenient. The forbidden ones are not catalogued." He rested his palm against the wall, just to the right of the misaligned zodiac. "And the truly dangerous ones are carved into stone." His fingers found a notch and pressed. The wall shifted, not open, not yet, but thoughtful, as if receiving a petition. "What is this place?" I asked. A child's question, precise as hunger. "It is where the church kept its drafts." He smiled without teeth. "And sometimes its erasers." I thought of the marginal hand. Remove 3 years here. Normalize feast to new moon. Overwrite eclipse record. "Why?" I asked. "Why edit the sky?" "For the same reason emperors edited maps." He tapped the wheel. "To arrange obedience into a calendar." to place the faithful where the stars will seem to agree with authority. If you make the heavens nod, the earth will bow. He let me hold one of the chained volumes. It was heavier than its size. The title, if it was a title, had been scraped, the way names are scraped off stones when regimes change. Inside, a concordance of feasts to planetary hours, of saints to star regencies, of miracles to meteorological anomalies. Not superstition. System, too neat for coincidence, too ambitious for innocence. Did the artists know? I asked, unwisely, thinking of the ceiling above as if it could hear us through stone. Some, he said. But knowing changes nothing. It only changes you. He reached into his robe and produced a thin slate of something that did not reflect properly. Look. At first, I saw only a dull surface. Then, as if the earth had learned to hold breath again, lines floated up on the slate. Not reflected lines, but the lines from the diagram in my stolen page. The vault of the chapel stripped of color, reduced to intention. He moved the slate slowly, aligning it with the wall's carved wheel. The lines on the slate locked into place with the chisel work, and a tiny click like a throat deciding to swallow carried through the stone. Somewhere deeper, a bolt withdrew its certainty. The door, he said, that should not open. Action. We did not push it that night. Not yet. Instead, he told me about the councils that edit more than doctrine, the meetings where time itself is an agenda item. He spoke of the phantom time that swims like an eel through the centuries, appearing where the record has been made too clean. He gave me names of saints dropped like inconvenient footnotes, of popes whose reigns appear only because an index demanded it. He showed me a palimpsest where the earlier writing had been growled into the parchment by a hand that wanted to be remembered after an erasure. And he taught me to recognize the most dangerous sentence in any archive. As it is known. Known by whom? He asked. Known for whose convenience? He placed the chained book back on the table with a tenderness I had thought I possessed only for the host. You are a priest, I said. I was a boy, he said. The rest is edits. When he left, he took nothing with him. When I left, I took my breath back to my cell and placed it beside the stolen leaf and heard them argue. The page wanted to make me brave. The breath wanted to make me safe. I lay awake between them while the bells below the bells did their patient arithmetic of hours. I was thirsty. Thirst in the right man is treason. Some stories promise the miracle first, then the price. Ours demanded the price in advance. On the third descent, when we finally pressed the wall wide enough to admit a man, the chapel above seemed to lean in. The misaligned zodiac rotated under our palms, resisting until it agreed with a sky that never happened. Behind the stone waited not a treasure, no gems, no reliquary to silence my theft with shine, but an instrument, brass and wood, and mathematics arranged into a machine that had learned humility from the dark. It was a map that hoped to be a prophecy, a calendar that wanted to be a leash. I will tell you what we found there. I will tell you who paid for it with memory. But if you turn away now, let this be the one sentence you remember when morning makes you polite again. Silence wasn't sacred, it was enforced. And the stars, God help us, were footnotes. I did not sleep after the first descent. Sleep would have been a form of betrayal. My cell, as modest as any monk's, felt suddenly like a stage set four walls rehearsing obedience, while the real script was buried beneath the chapel. Every sound above ground seemed counterfeit, bells that rang because men demanded it, not because time agreed. I lay awake, counting not minutes, but edits. The page I had stolen whispered from under my pillow, as though ink could speak when denied an audience. When the custodian returned for me, I followed without asking how he knew I was ready. He carried no lamp, only a stub of wax that burned too small to comfort and too stubborn to die. His silence was not the practiced kind of monks. It was an old silence, the kind that had grown roots and learned to drink from darkness. We opened the panel again. The seam yielded more easily now, as if the stone had grown familiar with my hand. This time the air that bled out was colder, hungrier. It touched my skin like fingers of chalk. The second door did not swing. It receded. Slowly, deliberately, stone sliding into stone, with the sigh of centuries rearranging themselves. And then the hum washed over me. Low at first, like bees trapped in amber, then deeper, resonant, vibrating in my ribs. My breath fell into its rhythm before I realized I was being trained. The vault beyond was unlike the narrow chamber I had seen before. It was vast, ribbed with brass arcs that caught and bent the candlelight into streaks across the ceiling. Each rib bore inscriptions so fine they seemed less carved than etched by light itself. Planetary symbols, numerals, tiny prayers. I traced one with my finger. The groove was shallow, yet it pulsed faintly as if heat still lived in the metal. Planetary hours, the custodian murmured. His voice trembled not from fear, but from reverence. Every rib a day, every mark a negotiation. Prayer becomes schedule. Schedule becomes law. I remembered my catechism matins, lauds, vespers, hours measured by bells and tradition. But here, time itself was recalibrated, not to the rising sun, but to Saturn, to Venus, to Mars. A calendar of obedience written in the sky, then shackled to earth by brass and stone. The hum grew stronger as we stepped further in. At first, I thought it came from hidden mechanisms, gears or pipes, but no, it emanated from the shelves themselves. Iron shelves lined both walls, stacked with books that did not sleep. Each book was bound in dark leather, thick as skin, collared with bronze rings, and chained to the stone. They did not rattle when we passed. They hummed, a harmony of restrained voices, too low to form words, but too insistent to ignore. Chained books, the custodian said, running his hand along one spine as a father might brush the hair of a sleeping child. They were not shackled to preserve the parchment. They were shackled to protect the living. Knowledge does not burn easily, but it can bite. I reached for the nearest. The chain resisted, then relented enough for me to open the cover on the table. No title, only a scar where a name had been scraped away. The first page sighed, releasing a cloud of dust that smelled like damp caves and old blood. Columns of numbers stretched across the vellum dates, eclipses, conjunctions. But in the margin, hurried Latin notations, triennium sublatum, festum translatum, eclipsis abrogata. 3 years removed, feast relocated, eclipse abolished. I swallowed hard. This was no astronomer's diary. It was an instruction manual for editing time. The custodian's eyes caught the candle light, pale and tired. "The phantom centuries," he whispered. "The years that never were, yet still rule. That is no visit. It can." I had heard the rumor, dismissed it as lunacy. The phantom time hypothesis claiming that nearly 300 years of our calendar were fabricated, slipped into history like false relics. But here it was, in ink, a priest's hand bending the sky to fit decree. Why? My voice cracked. Why invent years that never lived? He placed his hand flat on the page. Because power requires memory, and memory requires calendar. If you insert centuries, you insert kings. If you erase them, you erase their enemies. Time is the most obedient servant when you teach it to forget. We moved deeper. My lamp flared against fragments on the walls. A fresco of a serpent coiled around a cross, its scales marked with zodiac signs, a reliquary sealed with wax, labeled not with a saint's name, but a constellation. The vault was not a library. It was a confession locked in chains. Another codex yielded to my trembling fingers. Its margins bore tiny Jesuit symbols, stars, spirals, and crosses that formed secret equations. Beside certain gospel passages, a note, Miraculum per artem opticam, miracle by optical art, resurrection by controlled breath, multiplication of loaves, explained by sleight of hand and communal illusion. This is blasphemy, I whispered. This is bookkeeping, the custodian replied. The Jesuits did not deny miracles. They accounted for them. They recorded the methods in case the church needed to repeat them. Further along, another volume bore the mark of the Rosicrucians, a cross entwined with a rose. Its margins whispered of alchemy, of hidden correspondences between planets and prayers. One passage described how incense mixed with specific herbs could produce visions mistaken for divine apparitions. Another mapped constellations to organs of the body, claiming cures that were later canonized as saintly interventions. I could hardly breathe. The vault throbbed around me, the hum rising and falling like a heartbeat. Every book was a wound the church had bandaged in chains. Why keep them? I asked. If they contradict the faith? Because destruction breeds suspicion, the custodian said. But secrecy breeds obedience. To know is dangerous. To almost know is fatal. He showed me a ledger, its parchment yellowed and thin as skin. Inside were named saints I had never heard, popes I had never studied. Some names bore crosses, others violent erasures, letters gouged so deep they scarred the parchment beneath. Saints removed when their miracles contradicted the narrative, he said. Popes deleted when their decrees threatened control. But the bones remain. The bones always remain. And mine too. I traced a groove where a name had been carved away. My fingertips felt the ghost of letters. Sancta Sophia de Roma, Papa Lucianus II. I whispered them aloud. The hum deepened. For a moment, I thought the chains rattled, though the custodian did not flinch. We unrolled a map sealed in a metal tube. Spread across the table, it showed the Mediterranean, but stretched coastlines too long, islands where none should be, cities bearing names lost to modern atlases. And in the margin, a decree, terra haec delenda est ex memoria. This land must be erased from memory. Did these places exist? I asked. He did not answer directly. You mistake erasure for absence. Absence is only what memory consents to forget. The candle flickered violently. I thought of the fresco above us, tourists gazing at the painted heavens, never knowing what hummed below their feet. Why me? I asked. Why show me this? The custodian's face, half in shadow, looked like stone carved by sorrow. Because you already stole a page, because thirst, once awakened, must be quenched, and because silence is never neutral, it chooses its side. The hum swelled again, louder, angrier. My vision blurred, not from smoke, but from resonance. The books were not asleep, they were speaking. The chains vibrated, like strings plucked by invisible hands. I pressed my palms against my ears, but the sound was not in the air, it was in my blood. The custodian closed the ledger with a snap, and the hum softened to a whisper. "This is only the first vault," he said. "There are deeper ones, each more dangerous than the last. Remember, the Church does not fear heresy. She fears memory." We sealed the door behind us, but the whisper lingered in my chest long after. Back in my cell, I unfolded the stolen page. The geometry of the Sistine ceiling glared up at me, annotated in that same furious hand, instructions for editing the heavens themselves. For the first time, I realized I was not holding history. I was holding its edits. And somewhere beneath the chapel, history was still whispering. The hum did not leave me when we sealed the door. It followed me up the steps, clinging to my bones like frost. Even as we walked through the chapel, empty, silent, drenched in moonlight, I felt the vibration in my chest, as if the chained books were still speaking inside me. My companion said nothing. His silence was not absence, but weight, pressing against me until I could hardly breathe. We waited 2 nights before returning. Or perhaps it was longer. I no longer trusted the calendar. Each toll of the bells reminded me of the marginal note I had seen. Remove 3 years here, normalize feast, erase eclipse. If time could be rewritten in ink, how could I be sure my hours had not already been deleted? When at last we descended again, the vault received us like lungs starved of air. The hum surged. The moment my foot touched the stone floor, the books remembered. The custodian beckoned me to a deeper alcove, where the shelves curved inward like ribs protecting a heart. Here, the chains were shorter, the locks thicker, the covers darker. He chose a volume bound in crimson leather, clasped with a serpent biting its own tail. "This one," he said, "was copied from the Gospel of Mary." The copyists were careful, but not careful enough. The clasp snapped open with a sound like bone. The parchment within was fragile yet defiant. The ink faded but legible. I read words I had never been taught. Mary speaking not as supplicant, but as teacher, describing visions of the risen Christ that bypassed Peter, bypassed hierarchy, bypassed the institution itself. "This gospel," the custodian whispered, "was too dangerous. It made authority horizontal, not vertical. It gave voice where silence was demanded. So they chained it." I turned the page. In the margins, notes had been added centuries later. Suppressio, necessaria, necessary suppression, oblivio sancta, holy forgetting. I closed the book, trembling. The hum seemed to rise in protest, as if the vault itself resented the clasp. Another codex lay nearby, its spine reinforced with iron. The chain creaked when I dragged it forward. Inside were lists names of saints unfamiliar, their feast days meticulously recorded, their miracles described in detail. Yet across each entry, red ink slashed diagonally, abolitus, hereticus, non-extat, abolished, heretic, does not exist, erased saints. the custodian said softly. Once canonized, then removed when their miracles became inconvenient. Some healed with herbs that later the Church called witchcraft. Others preached mercy when the Inquisition demanded fire. But names, once spoken, linger. Even erased, they whisper. Very fineness. I traced one name with my fingertip. Sanctus Candidus de Hispania. Next to it, a note. Cultus nimis populares. Cult too popular. A saint erased not for falsehood but for influence. The custodian guided me to another shelf, where a codex thicker than the rest lay chained at both covers. We opened it together, the locks screeching like animals starved of movement. Inside, papal decrees, some familiar, others utterly foreign. A pattern emerged. For every legitimate pope in history, there were shadows, names scratched in, reigns recorded, then later erased. Phantom popes, he explained. Inserted to pad chronology, erased when their decrees contradicted successors. Some never existed at all, yet their bulls remain in copy. They were scaffolding used to hold history in place, then dismantled once the structure stood. I stared at the names, half legible beneath gouges of ink and knife. Papa Donatus III, Papa Severinus Minor, shadows of authority, existing only in edits. The hum grew sharper here, almost angry. The chains rattled slightly, though no hand touched them. A sudden sound froze me. Footsteps above. Dull thuds, measured, deliberate. Someone was walking the chapel at night. The custodian extinguished the candle with his fingers, ignoring the burn. Darkness swallowed us whole. The hum became unbearable in the absence of light, a chorus of whispers pressed against my skull. The footsteps lingered, paused, directly above. I imagined a guard leaning down, ear pressed to the marble. My lungs refused to move. The custodian's hand gripped my arm, steady, commanding me to silence. At last, the footsteps receded. We waited in the blackness until the hum subsided to its usual throb. When he relit the candle, the flame revealed his hand blistered but steady. You see, he whispered, silence is not sacred. It is enforced. We moved on. Another chained book revealed records of the Inquisition. Not trials, not confessions, but scripts, predetermined questions and answers, rehearsed outcomes. The accused were not judged. They were edited. One page bore the note, coerce confession to align with canon. Another, fabricate heresy to justify execution. This, I said, my throat dry, was not justice. It was consistency, he replied. The Inquisition was a press. It printed fear onto memory. He pulled from the shelf a smaller codex, worn nearly to threads. Inside were maps, cosmological diagrams aligning saints to stars, feasts to solstices, miracles to eclipses. The notes cross-referenced astronomical events with biblical passages, adjusting them so that scripture matched the sky. Do you see? He asked. When the heavens refused obedience, men taught them to kneel. The candle guttered again. For a moment, the vault seemed alive. Every chain a nerve, every book an organ. The hum rose and fell in waves, not random but patterned, like chants in a language too old for comprehension. I closed my eyes. The whispers resolved into fragments, erased names, forbidden feasts, phantom years. They begged not for belief, but for memory. When I opened my eyes, the custodian was watching me. "You hear them now," he said. "Once you hear, you can never unhear. This is the fever. It will either consume you or sharpen you. Is all to vray down. I wanted to leave, to breathe clean air, to see the sky unedited. Yet I knew I would return. Thirst does not disappear by fleeing the well." We sealed the vault again. As the stone slid into place, the hum ceased, cut off mid-breath. The silence above felt false, brittle. Back in my cell, I wrote the names I had seen: saints, popes, erased lands onto scraps of liturgical paper. I hid them beneath my mattress. I knew it was futile. Ink can be burned, scraps discarded. But memory, once awakened, is harder to kill. That night, I dreamed of the chains. They rattled not with protest, but with laughter. When you linger too long among chained books, you begin to dream their hum. It fills the gaps between your heartbeat, slips into your breath, rearranges your memory. By the third descent, I no longer needed the custodian's invitation. My body moved toward the hidden panel as though gravity itself had tilted. The door yielded quickly this time, almost eagerly. I wondered if stone, like man, could learn addiction. Inside, the hum welcomed us louder than before. Or perhaps my ears had grown more obedient. We walked deeper than we had ever dared, past shelves already familiar, red leather gospel, erased saints, phantom popes, into corridors where the brass ribs bent into arches overhead. The metal was not dull here. It gleamed faintly, as if polished by invisible hands. The custodian raised the candle. Its light caught hundreds of small brass plaques nailed to the walls. Each bore an inscription: dates, events, decrees. At first, I thought them memorials. Then I realized they were corrections. Whole centuries reduced to plaques, no wider than my palm. "Edits of time," he said, reading my confusion. "The archives of absence. Each plaque marks a change the church demanded." I stepped closer. One plaque read, "Anno Domini 732 solar eclipse omitted. Fear considered unproductive." Another, "Anno Domini 1000. 118 reign of Pope Gelasius Minor removed. Decree incompatible with consolidation." I traced the grooves with my fingers. They were deep, deliberate, as though hammered by hands, desperate not to forget, even as they commanded forgetting. Further on, the shelves grew stranger, books bound not in leather but in parchment, layered thick as bark. Some bore locks too corroded to open. Others were fused shut with resin. The custodian selected one sealed with iron clasps and placed it on the table. Together we forced it open, the hinges shrieking like animals. Inside, diagrams of the Sistine Chapel's ceiling. Not the paintings, no figures, no prophets, but bare geometry, arcs, lines, intersections. The skeleton beneath Michelangelo's vision, but overlaying the lines were symbols, zodiacal glyphs, planetary sigils, occult annotations. It was never only art, the custodian said. It was alignment. Every figure conceals a sign, every posture a constellation. Michelangelo painted obedience, but the vault still remembers the stars. I stared until the lines danced. The ram's horn in a fold of fabric, the scorpion's tail in a shadow. Two fish entwined in a border no one notices. The ceiling was scripture written twice, once for the faithful, once for those who edit faith. Why hide this? I asked. Because the stars cannot be burned, he said. So they were painted over, disguised, buried in beauty. We turned another page. This one bore a marginal note in hurried Latin: align solstice to coronation, falsify equinox record, erase prior calculation. Beneath, in smaller script, silence enforced by death. The hum sharpened until my skull ached. I slammed the book shut. The custodian touched my arm. You see now, art is memory. Alter the art, alter the memory. And if the art refuses, you bury the refusal in pigment. We pressed on. The vault narrowed into a spiral stair descending deeper. I hesitated, but the custodian urged me. The air grew heavier, metallic, tinged with something like blood. At the bottom, a chamber opened round, domed, its walls inlaid with brass constellations. In the center stood a device, part astrolabe, part sundial, part machine. Gears protruded, lenses glimmered, chains dangled. This is where they rehearsed prophecy, he said. A machine to align scripture with stars. Feed it a date, it will show you which constellation to canonize, which miracle to announce. The faithful believed heaven confirmed the church. In truth, the church instructed heaven. I circled the device. Its gears were etched with names: Leo, Virgo, Sagittarius. Its base bore inscriptions, scratched by desperate hands: Non est tempus verum. Time is not true. I touched the brass. It was warm. The custodian whispered, It still runs. It runs because memory runs. When not down. Before I could answer, a sound broke the air boots on stone, closer, angrier than before. Guards. Their torches flickered at the far end of the passage. The custodian seized my wrist, pulled me behind the machine. We crouched in darkness as the guards entered. I saw their faces in the torchlight. Swiss guards, their armor glinting, their expressions blank. They did not look for intruders. They listened. One pressed his ear to the chained books, nodding as if the hum reported to him. Another adjusted a lever on the brass ribs. The hum shifted pitch, like an instrument retuned. My heart slammed against my ribs. The custodian held a finger to his lips. After a moment, the guards withdrew, torches receding, footsteps fading. They maintain it, the custodian whispered. They do not protect the church, they protect the edits. We waited until silence returned. Then he led me quickly up the stairs, past the shelves, past the plaques, back to the panel. Before we sealed it, he pressed a scrap of parchment into my hand. On it was a list of names: saints erased, popes deleted, years invented. Keep these, he said. Do not trust ink, trust memory. Speak the names when you pray. The danger is not heresy. The danger is forgetting. Back in my cell, I read the list until the candle guttered out. The names etched themselves into me. Sophia of Rome, Donatus III, Severinus Minor, Candidus of Hispania, ghosts of history demanding resurrection. I lay awake, the hum still in my blood. And I understood. I was no longer custodian of faith. I was custodian of memory. Silence was not sacred. It was enforced, and the whispers would not let me rest. The bells rang, but I no longer believed them. Once, their toll had been comfort, a promise that the world still moved as God intended, that time itself was obedient to sacred rhythm, but after the vault, after the chained books and the plaques of edited years, each chime felt counterfeit, a sound not of heaven but of decree. I began to study the bells themselves, their intervals, their mathematics, and I noticed patterns too precise to be coincidence, delays of seconds, accelerations that seemed choreographed not for worship but for calibration. The bells were clocks, and the clocks were liars. The custodian confirmed my suspicions during our fourth descent. He led me past the chained books to a narrow corridor, ending in a stone table. Upon it lay a ledger thicker than any Bible I had carried. Its cover was stamped with a single word, Reforme. Inside were records of calendar corrections, centuries of them. Some entries neat and formal, others hurried, desperate. I recognized dates from history: the Council of Nicaea, the reform of Julius Caesar, the decree of Pope Gregory XIII. But the margins revealed more notes in smaller script, contradicting the official record. One entry caught my eye: 1,582. 10 days removed from October. Justification: alignment with equinox. Hidden: discrepancy with eclipse record. I knew the story. Every school child did. When the Gregorian calendar replaced the Julian, 10 days were skipped to realign the seasons. But here was the truth. The shift was not correction, but concealment. The eclipses recorded in chronicles did not match the new calendar. They had to be edited, erased, replaced with obedience. I turned the page. Another note: AD 614, 911. Insert phantom centuries. Adjust chronicles. Synchronize reigns of popes with fabricated years. The words struck like thunder. This was the phantom time hypothesis in ink, not speculation. Entire centuries manufactured, rulers inserted, wars stretched, saints repositioned in years that never breathed. Why? I whispered. Why insert centuries? It is a long year. The custodian's face was grave. Because memory requires scaffolding. If you add years, you create space to store myths. Myths become kings. Kings become authority. People obey not what is true, but what is remembered. I closed the ledger, trembling. But surely the stars, surely astronomy would reveal the lie. He opened a smaller book, its pages filled with drawings of eclipses, comets, solstices, each event cross-referenced to scripture, then adjusted. One note read, Eclipse of AD 840 erased, incompatible with decree of Pope Leo IV. Another, Comet of 912 reassigned to year of famine, miracle reframed as divine warning. The sky is testimony, he said. But testimony can be silenced. If eclipses contradict history, erase them. If comets suggest years that should not exist, reassign them. The faithful do not study stars. They study sermons. I felt sick. My training as a priest had been built on certainty. Feast days, saints' lives, the calendar of salvation. Yet here, beneath the chapel, I saw that time itself had been curated like a manuscript. We moved deeper. The corridor opened into a chamber lined with astronomical instruments, astrolabes, armillary spheres, sundials, but they were not intact. Their faces had been filed, their numerals altered, their inscriptions scraped and rewritten. Each bore tiny brass tags, adjusted 1,475, corrected 1,600, revised 1,724. These instruments, the custodian explained, once recorded the heavens faithfully, but when the heavens refused to align with edits, the instruments were modified. Truth was bent until it bowed. I picked up an astrolabe, its bronze surface tarnished. The rete, which should have depicted the stars, was missing 3. In their place were blank spaces. I asked why. They were erased, he said simply. Not because they did not exist, but because they existed in years that the Church removed. A star that shines in a deleted year must itself be deleted. I set the astrolabe down, my hands shaking. He guided me to a parchment pinned to the wall. It bore calculations of the equinoxes, aligned to Easter. But next to them, in red ink, were corrections. Shift by 2 days. Align with decree. Erase earlier calculation. At the bottom, one line in Latin, ut mundus cum ecclesia conveniet. Primum caelum persuadendum est. To make the world agree with the Church, first persuade the sky. The hum returned, vibrating in my skull. I realized then it was not the books alone, it was the edits themselves, resonating like wounds. I pressed my forehead against the cold stone wall, wishing for silence. But silence, I remembered, was never sacred. It was enforced. The custodian placed a hand on my shoulder. This is only the beginning. The calendar is their greatest relic. It does not preserve truth. It preserves obedience. I lifted my eyes to the instruments, the ledgers, the plaques, and for the first time I understood that the calendar was not a measure of time. It was a prison of memory. The first time I saw the Gregorian decree with my own eyes, I almost laughed, not because it was absurd, but because it was so small. A parchment no larger than a hymnal page, ink browned with age, edges frayed. Yet this scrap of vellum had amputated 10 days from the world. Entire lifetimes compressed, weddings vanished, debts forgiven, deaths shifted all by decree. The text was precise. From October 4 to October 15, let the faithful advance without count. 10 days shall not exist for the sake of the equinox and the sanctity of Easter. I remembered my seminary lectures. The professor had framed it as correction, a scientific triumph over the clumsiness of Caesar's calendar. But the margins of this decree told another story. In smaller script, slanted and urgent, someone had written, "Eclipses contradict the correction. Records inconsistent. Adjust chronicles accordingly." The custodian handed me a second parchment. This one, a chronicle from a monastery in Gaul. It recorded an eclipse seen on what should have been the 10th of October 1582, the very day that no longer existed. The scribe's Latin faltered at the absurdity. Eclipse witnessed on a day the world denies. The ink trembled. So did my hands. How can an eclipse occur on a day that does not exist? I asked. The custodian's eyes glinted in the dim light. Because the sky does not take orders. He spread more chronicles before me, from Spain, from Bohemia, from the Holy Roman Empire. All recorded celestial events, comets, eclipses, alignments that contradicted the new calendar, and next to each entry, Vatican annotations, erase, reassign, suppress. The Gregorian reform was not a correction, he said. It was a mask. They erased what the sky testified to protect what the Church demanded. I turned to another ledger. This one bore the name Calendarium Astronomicum. Its pages detailed centuries of solstice measurements, eclipse cycles, star positions, but across entire sections, thick red lines slashed, accompanied by single words, false, heretical, to be forgotten. One passage stopped me cold. It described a solar eclipse in AD 840, witnessed across Europe, yet in the Vatican's red ink, abolished, incompatible with chronology. Incompatible, I whispered. How can the sky be incompatible? The custodian smiled grimly. When memory is edited, reality becomes error. The eclipse existed, but the years into which it fit were removed. Therefore, the eclipse must be erased. He led me to a cabinet of instruments. Inside lay sundials, astrolabes, armillary spheres. Each had been mutilated, numerals filed off, stars removed, inscriptions rewritten. A brass sundial bore scratches where the gnomon had been repositioned. An astrolabe had blank gaps where stars should have been engraved. Science became miracle, he said, lifting the astrolabe. When a natural event threatened the narrative, it was relabeled as divine intervention or deleted. The faithful saw wonders. Scholars who questioned saw the Inquisition. He handed me a thin booklet bound in vellum. Inside were records of storms, famines, earthquakes. But in the margins, instructions. Frame famine as punishment for heresy. Record earthquake as miracle of street Felix. Attribute storm to prayer of Pope. The hum in the vault deepened. My skin prickled, as if the air itself disapproved of my reading. I flipped to a page describing Halley's Comet. In the original hand, AD 912. Comet visible for 30 days. In the margin, reassigned to AD 1006. Erase 912 from record. Fabricate famine to cover discrepancy. I stared at the ink until it blurred. A comet does not change its year. Men had moved it. I thought of my own childhood. Nights spent gazing at stars, believing they were proof of God's constancy. Now I saw them as witnesses gagged by ink. Why not destroy these records? I asked. Why keep the evidence? The custodian closed the book gently. Because even liars need ledgers. If you erase the edits, you risk editing them again. They keep these vaults, not to remember truth, but to preserve the act of forgetting. We walked deeper. The air grew colder, heavier. Another chamber opened, smaller, circular, its walls inscribed with calendars overlapping like palimpsests, some marked by Julian months, others Gregorian, still others entirely alien 13 months, lunar cycles, Egyptian reckonings, all layered, all contradictory. This, the custodian said, is the archive of alternatives, systems of time discarded, suppressed, destroyed. The Church chose which rhythm men would live by, which errors would become sacred. I pressed my hand against one calendar, its paint flaking beneath my touch. It bore 13 months, each aligned to lunar phases, closer to the body's rhythm, I thought. Beneath, scratched in Latin, prohibit, too natural, dangerous. The hum swelled until my teeth ached. I stepped back, shaking. Dangerous? I asked. He nodded. Dangerous, because it reminded men that time is not owned. Dangerous, because it aligned with the sky instead of decrees. Dangerous because it was true. I felt nausea rise. The walls seemed to tilt, the calendars spinning, collapsing. I pressed my eyes shut but saw only more edits, days erased, months reassigned, centuries fabricated. When I opened them again, the custodian was watching me. "You are thirsty," he said, "but thirst has its price. To know this is to live outside of time. You will never hear a bell again without doubt. You will never trust a clock. Every feast, every holy day, every year will taste of ash." He placed the mutilated astrolabe into my hands. "Hold it. Feel the absence." The metal was cold, heavier than it should have been. My fingers traced the gaps where stars had been erased. The emptiness was louder than any presence. I wanted to drop it, but I held on. The astrolabe stayed in my hands long after the custodian moved on. Its bronze frame seemed to breathe, cold one moment, warm the next, as if the erased stars were trying to return through my skin. My thumb traced the emptiness again and again, and each time the gap felt deeper, not absence, but exile. I followed him into the deepest recess of the chamber. Here the walls bore not plaques or shelves, but layers of paint, each one overlapping the last. Calendars written, erased, rewritten, Julian dates beneath Gregorian, Gregorian beneath lunar, lunar beneath something stranger, marks I could not decipher, spirals and notations that felt older than Latin. The paint cracked in places, and from the fissures faint glimmers of gold leaf emerged, as though beneath all these calendars lay another one. The church had tried and failed to bury. "What is under there?" I asked. He brushed the wall gently. A flake of paint fell, revealing a sliver of pattern, a sun with 13 rays. "The first rhythm," he whispered. "A calendar of balance. 13 months, each aligned to the moon. Too simple, too human, too dangerous." "Dangerous?" He turned to me, eyes hollow. "Because it made time belong to everyone. No pope, no emperor, no decree could claim ownership of a sky that repeated itself faithfully. So they buried it under layers of edits until men forgot it existed." The hum returned, sharper now, vibrating in my teeth. It sounded almost like a chant, dozens of voices layered, repeating words I could not catch. I pressed my palms against my ears, but the sound only grew clearer. Latin syllables, fragments of names, dates recited like psalms. The custodian closed his eyes. "They are reciting the missing years. Once you hear them, you cannot forget. They will echo every time you look at a clock, every time you read a date on a tombstone. It's not rabbins over will." I stumbled backward, dizzy. The calendars on the walls seemed to shift, months bleeding into each other, days slipping like sand. I tried to breathe, but the air tasted of ashes, old ink, burnt parchment. "Enough," I begged. "I cannot bear it." He gripped my shoulders hard. "You must, or the edits will own you." He pulled me toward a pedestal at the chamber's center. Upon it lay a codex unlike the others. Its cover was iron, its hinges locked. The custodian produced a small key from his robe and turned it. The lock groaned, reluctant. When the cover opened, the hum ceased. Absolute silence fell so sudden it felt violent. Inside, the pages were blank. At least, they looked blank. I tilted the candle. Faint impressions emerged, indentations pressed by a stylus, writing without ink. I traced them with my finger. The impressions formed words. Ani ficti, fabricated years. Insertus in memoria, inserted into memory. Phantomus temporis, phantom time. This, he whispered, is the ledger of lies. Not what they erased, but what they invented. I turned more pages, lists of years, entire centuries catalogued with instructions. Invent reign of Pope Sylvester Minor. Fabricate famine in Francia. Assign eclipse to later year. It was not merely editing. It was authorship. History as fiction. Time as manuscript. I slammed the book shut. My breath shook. How can you still serve, knowing this? He looked at me long, the candlelight hollowing his face. Because service is the mask that keeps suspicion away. Because to guard the vault is to guard memory, even when it is false. Someone must remember the lies if truth is ever to return. Footsteps above interrupted us, faint at first, then stronger, quicker, guards again. The custodian motioned for silence. We pressed against the wall as shadows flickered down the stairwell. Torches flared. Voices spoke in Latin too low to catch. One guard descended halfway, scanning the chamber with narrowed eyes. His torchlight passed over the calendars, the mutilated instruments, the codex still trembling from my touch. My lungs screamed for air, but I dared not move. Finally, the guard turned back. His boots echoed as he climbed. The torches receded. Silence returned, not the sacred kind, but the brittle, enforced kind. The custodian exhaled. We are close to being discovered. You must decide if you will continue. Knowledge is thirst, but thirst draws hunters. I nodded slowly, though my chest still heaved. I will continue. I cannot stop now. He studied me for a long moment, then placed the iron-bound codex into my hands. Then keep this, he said. Hide it well. Do not trust ink. Do not trust stone. Trust only memory. The church can erase years, but it cannot erase what survives in the living. I cradled the codex like a relic, though I knew it was poison. When we sealed the chamber and climbed back into the chapel, dawn was breaking. The bells rang for lauds. I listened, counting the intervals, and felt the lie in every toll. Time, I realized, was not a river. It was a script. A script written, edited, and rewritten by hands that feared memory more than heresy. And I was no longer its audience. I was its witness. That night in my cell, I dreamed again. But not of chained books or erased saints. I dreamed of the sky. The stars wheeled above me, endless, stubborn. They whispered their own calendar, one no pope could touch. When I woke, I pressed my hand against my chest. My heart beat steadily. My pulse was older than any decree, and I understood what the custodian meant when he said, "Thirst has a price." Once you taste the true rhythm, you can never march to edited time again. I will never again trust a calendar. I will never again trust silence. Silence wasn't sacred. It was enforced. I had walked under the Sistine ceiling 1,000 times, but never once had I seen it. Not truly. Like every priest, I had tilted my head back, admired the muscular prophets, the furious angels, the stretching fingers of Adam and God. I had prayed beneath it, sung beneath it, breathed beneath it, and still I had not seen it. For the ceiling was not painted for the faithful. It was painted for the editors of memory. The custodian told me as much the night he first placed a restorer's lamp into my hands. Light, he said, does not reveal. It interrogates. Move it, side to side, and the paint will confess what sermons cannot. We waited until the chapel emptied of tourists and guards. Only silence and echoes remained, and even those felt rehearsed. I raised the lamp, letting its beam rake across the vault. At first, nothing. Just Michelangelo's fury frozen in color, prophets gesturing, sibyls brooding, angels stretching across curves of stone. But as the lamp angled, the cracks, the tiny fractures in pigment and plaster caught the light. And in those cracks lived shadows that should not have been. I thought my eyes deceived me. Then I saw it clearly. Between folds of drapery, the arc of a ram's horn, curved perfectly, too perfect for accident. Elsewhere, in a shadow no tourist would ever notice, a scorpion's tail curled, poised to strike. And in a dark corner where paint imitated shadow, two fish kissed, their bodies' faint outlines nested into the geometry of the vault. Zodiac. Not saints, not prophets, stars hidden in plain sight. The lamp trembled in my hand. "This cannot be," I whispered. The custodian's voice was steady. Michelangelo painted what he was told, but he also painted what he saw. The ceiling is a double text, one for the masses, one for those who edit the masses. I moved the lamp again, faster now, desperate, as though light itself could strip away centuries of lies. Symbols emerged everywhere, a lion's paw beneath a prophet's robe, the curve of Aquarius disguised as drapery, Gemini etched faintly into the musculature of angels. Every figure wore two identities, one sacred, one celestial. I staggered back. Why would they allow this? Why hide astrology in the holiest ceiling of Christendom? Because memory, the custodian said, is safest when it is disguised as beauty. The faithful see God and Adam, the initiated see the zodiac, and those who suspect nothing see only paint. He handed me a thin notebook, its pages yellowed. "The diary of a restorer's apprentice," he explained. "He wrote what he saw when he cleaned the vault centuries ago." I opened it carefully. The Latin was crude, the script clumsy, but the words chilled me. At night the lines are not where I left them. The figures shift, the stars emerge. Paint does not sleep. I looked up at the ceiling again. In the dim light, the figures did seem restless, as if the plaster itself was breathing. The custodian lowered his voice. "The ceiling is alive because memory is alive, and memory refuses silence." We climbed scaffolding that had been left from a recent restoration. Up close, the paint smelled of dust, sweat, and faintly of iron like dried blood. My fingers hovered over the fresco but did not touch. To touch was heresy, a violation of both art and faith. Yet, even without touching, I felt the heat of it. The custodian aimed the lamp along the curve of the vault. Hidden beneath layers of blue, faint lines appeared, geometric scaffolding invisible from below. Circles intersecting, triangles nesting, all converging on specific points in the ceiling. "Constellations," he whispered. "The geometry of the sky, mapped into plaster. Every prophet points not to God, but to stars. Every gesture is alignment." I traced one triangle with my eyes. Its apex landed on the hand of Adam, reaching toward God. But in the geometry, the hand aligned not with divinity, but with the star Sirius. The creation was not of man, but of memory. The custodian drew a scrap of parchment from his robe. On it, a diagram nearly identical to what I saw on the ceiling, annotated with symbols and notes. "This page was stolen once," he said. "Perhaps you have seen it." My breath caught. It was the page I had hidden in my cassock weeks earlier, the page that had stolen my sleep, the same hand, the same furious ink. I held the lamp higher. The ceiling seemed to resist, then surrender. More lines appeared, more symbols revealed themselves. Virgo curled in the bend of a Sibyl's elbow. Capricorn's horns nestled in angel wings. Cancer's claws stretched across the folds of a prophet's garment. The fresco was not art, it was code. Why would Michelangelo agree to this? I asked. The custodian's eyes narrowed. Do you think he had a choice? The church wanted beauty. The church also wanted memory disguised. An artist does what survival demands. He painted both. The hum rose again, faint but insistent, vibrating in the scaffolding. I clutched the lamp tighter. The custodian closed his eyes, as if listening to a choir only he could understand. The hum grows stronger here, he said, because here the edits are painted, not written. Words can be erased. Paint lingers. Even silence cannot suppress color forever. I looked down from the scaffolding. The chapel floor stretched far below, dark and empty. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a figure slipping between pews. But when I blinked, nothing, only shadow. The custodian noticed my fear. They watch, he said softly. Not always with eyes, sometimes with silence, sometimes with footsteps. You must learn which silences are sacred and which are enforced. I turned back to the ceiling. My lamp revealed another faint mark, a circle enclosing a cross, tucked into the border near Jonah. But the cross was not Christian. It was the Rosicrucian emblem. The notebook trembled in my hands. At night, the lines are not where I left them. I whispered the words aloud. The fresco seemed to shift in the corner of my vision. A prophet's gaze turned slightly. A shadow lengthened unnaturally. The paint moved. I nearly dropped the lamp. The custodian steadied me. You saw it. Few do. That is why you must keep watching. I wanted to leave, to flee the scaffolding, the ceiling, the whispers hidden in paint. But thirst kept me there. Thirst for what the ceiling concealed. The custodian pointed. Do you see? There, barely visible, an inscription scratched into plaster beneath the paint. Ut pictura memoria est. As painting, so is memory. The fresco was not decoration, it was archive. I climbed down, shaking, my knees weak. The chapel floor felt too solid, as if it mocked my unsteady faith. The custodian extinguished the lamp. Darkness swallowed the zodiac, the geometry, the hidden inscriptions. Only the familiar ceiling remained. Prophets, angels, Adam, God. Beautiful, harmless, but I knew now what beauty concealed. Silence wasn't sacred, it was enforced. And the paint did not sleep. I could not keep away from the apprentice's diary. Each descent, I carried it with me, tucked inside my cassock like contraband. Its cover smelled of dust and mold, its pages curled with damp. Yet, whenever I opened it, the words felt fresher than my own breath. They were not doctrine, not sermons polished for pulpits. They were raw, nervous, human. The paint moved again, one entry began. Not in daylight, not before the eyes of my master, but when the scaffolding fell silent. At night, when candles dwindled, when prayers ceased, the figures breathed. Lines I had drawn straight were curved by morning. Shadows I had set to rest wandered like pilgrims. Paint does not sleep. I read the line again and again, until it burned behind my eyelids. Paint does not sleep. The custodian watched me with pity. The apprentice saw more than he should. He wrote truth, and for that he was erased. His name does not appear in records, only his diary remains. I traced the faded ink with my fingertip. The apprentice had scrawled drawings in the margins, tiny sketches of stars beside angels, constellations mapped onto prophets. His shaky hand tried to reconcile two truths, that he was painting saints and that saints were constellations in disguise. One sketch chilled me most. The famous image of God reaching toward Adam, except the apprentice had drawn not hands but stars, the constellation Orion mirrored in their stretch. I whispered, "The creation is not of man but of myth." The custodian's reply was steady. Not myth, memory. The ceiling preserves the memory they want remembered, while burying the memory they fear. Two truths, layered like plaster. The faithful see one, the editors see both. That night, we ascended the scaffolding again. The chapel was darker than before, as though the fresco itself had consumed the light. I raised the restorer's lamp. The cracks gleamed. The zodiac emerged, ram's horn, scorpion's tail, fish entwined. But then, something new. The apprentice had not lied. The lines were not where I had left them. A curve I had traced the night before now bent differently. A shadow stretched farther, a prophet's eye tilted, gazing not at heaven but at me. I dropped the lamp. The light swung wildly, shadows leaping across the vault. For a heartbeat, the angels writhed. The zodiac shimmered. The paint moved. The custodian caught the lamp before it shattered. His face was pale but calm. "You see now. The fresco breathes, because memory breathes. It resists silence. Every attempt to edit it makes it restless. At night, when the world grows still, memory stirs." I pressed my back against the scaffolding, shaking. "Then the ceiling is alive?" "No," he said. "Alive is the wrong word. The ceiling remembers, and memory is never still." He guided me lower, to a section few tourists ever notice. A panel above the entrance, dark, crowded with figures. He angled the lamp, and faint inscriptions emerged, not painted, but scratched into plaster beneath the color. Latin phrases in hurried hands. "Ut picura memoria est, oblivio est mors." Silence is death. The fresco whispered not with paint, but with graffiti hidden beneath it. The apprentice had written here, I realized, his protest carved into wet plaster, then buried under layers of divine paint. Yet, the scratches endured, faint but insistent, like whispers from beneath a coffin lid. The custodian read one aloud, his voice trembling. "Memoria resistit etiam cum sanguis delete." Memory resists even when blood erases. I felt dizzy. The chapel floor swam below us. The ceiling seemed to tilt. Prophets bending closer, saints leaning down, angels flexing their painted wings. The custodian steadied me. "You must understand," he said. "Art was never for beauty alone. It is archive. Every brushstroke edits memory. Every correction buries one truth and raises another." He pointed to the prophets. "Look, each figure gestures, not randomly. Each hand points toward a constellation hidden in geometry. Michelangelo painted theology for the people, but astronomy for the editors. Art is obedience twice written." I followed his finger. A Sibyl's arm pointed directly to where Libra's scales were etched faintly in the plaster. a prophet's scroll unfurled toward Sagittarius. Even Jonah, twisted in agony, aligned with Pisces. The zodiac was everywhere. Why hide it in paint? I asked. Because paint lasts longer than parchment, he said. Books burn, ink fades, but fresco endures centuries. To hide edits in paint is to hide them in memory itself. The ceiling is their vault above ground, visible yet unseen. I opened the diary again, desperate. Another entry glared up at me. The masters told me to paint shadow, but shadow refused. The night stretched it longer. When I returned at dawn, the figures had moved. Not by brush, by memory. The paint remembers what hands deny. I shuddered. The custodian blew out the lamp. Darkness swallowed the vault. For a moment, I thought I saw the stars themselves flicker above the zodiac, revealed not by paint, but by absence of light. The scorpion's tail glowed faintly, the ram's horns curled, the fish swam silently across plaster. When the lamp flared again, only prophets remained. The custodian descended first. I lingered on the scaffolding, staring upward, the apprentice's words echoing in my skull. Paint does not sleep. On the floor, the custodian looked up at me. You must choose whether to keep watching. Once you see the paint move, you cannot unsee it. You will never again look at art without suspicion. You will never again trust beauty. I climbed down slowly, knees trembling. The chapel felt different now, less holy, more haunted. Every brushstroke was a whisper. Every color, a correction. Back in my cell, I opened the diary one last time. The final entry was smudged, water-stained, barely legible. But one line burned clear. They told me silence is sacred. I learned silence is enforced. The ceiling remembers for those of us who will be erased. I closed the diary and hid it beneath my mattress. My hands shook. I understood now why the apprentice had disappeared from records. He had seen too much. He had written too much. And yet, even erased, his memory lived in paint, in scratches, in whispers. That night, I dreamed not of books or calendars, but of frescoes breathing above me. Angels exhaled stars, prophets whispered constellations, and the ceiling moved, shifting, restless, alive with memory. When I woke, the dream clung to me like smoke. I could not shake it. Silence wasn't sacred, it was enforced. And the paint did not sleep. The next night, the custodian led me not up the scaffolding, but beneath the chapel floor. There, in a chamber smaller than the vaults of chained books, he lit a single candle. The flame revealed parchment after parchment, sketches of the Sistine ceiling stripped of its color. No prophets, no angels, no Adam or God, only lines. Geometry. Each page was a skeleton of the fresco. Circles, triangles, intersecting arcs. When overlaid, they formed constellations. The zodiac, hidden in paint, now glared in ink. These, the custodian whispered, are the drafts. The diagrams Michelangelo used, or perhaps was given, to align art with memory. What he painted above was not his alone. It was commission, instruction, obedience. He handed me one sheet. It mapped the entire ceiling into a wheel of 12 divisions, each marked with symbols Aries, Taurus, Gemini, all the way around. At the center, a Latin phrase, Memoria Dominium. Memory is dominion. The words chilled me. more than any scripture I had memorized. We returned to the chapel and climbed the scaffolding again. This time, the custodian carried a sheet of glass etched with faint lines. He pressed it against the fresco. The geometry aligned perfectly the prophet's hands, the angel's wings, the folds of drapery all fell into place on the zodiac wheel. "Do you see?" he asked. I did. The ceiling was not decoration. It was a calendar, a cosmic ledger painted above every pilgrim's head. "But why disguise it?" I asked, voice shaking. "Because art is safer than decree. Decrees can be challenged, burned, overturned. But beauty is untouchable. The faithful do not question beauty. They adore it. So, memory is hidden in paint, beyond suspicion." He shifted the lamp again. More symbols emerged. In the folds of Isaiah's robe, Virgo's virgin. In the musculature of Ezekiel's arm, Leo's mane. Even the famous panel of the deluge, chaos of figures drowning, revealed Cancer's claws stretching across the waves. Every story in Scripture had been twinned with stars, every miracle aligned to constellations. Every prophet carried two faces, one holy, one celestial. I opened the apprentice's diary again. One passage I had skipped before now demanded my eyes. The masters told me I painted for God, but I knew I painted for the stars. They erased my name, but the paint remembers. I hear it whisper at night. Memory does not die. It hides in color. The custodian lowered his voice. The church edits history in ink, but paint it cannot burn all paint. So it edits memory by disguise. The ceiling tells two stories, the official and the forbidden. One day, the forbidden will bleed through. He extinguished the lamp. Darkness. Absolute. At first I thought the ceiling had vanished. Then, slowly, light from the moon spilled through high windows. In that faint glow, the prophets blurred, the angels dissolved. And in their place, stars. Constellations traced themselves across plaster. Aries shone. Scorpio flicked its tail. Pisces swam silently. The ceiling breathed memory, unfiltered, unashamed. My knees buckled. I clutched the scaffolding, terrified. The custodian whispered, "Now you understand why they fear the night. By day, pilgrims see saints. By night, the fresco refuses obedience. It remembers." We descended in silence. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the diary. On the chapel floor, I looked up once more. The ceiling seemed calm again, prophets stern, angels radiant, Adam and God frozen mid-touch, beautiful, harmless. But I knew the truth. The ceiling moved at night. The custodian placed a hand on my shoulder. They believe silence will protect them. But silence cannot bind paint. Every crack is a confession. Every shadow is a memory. When the fresco crumbles centuries from now, the zodiac beneath will rise again, and then the faithful will ask questions. I whispered the line that had haunted me since the vault. Silence wasn't sacred, it was enforced. Quote, he nodded, and the ceiling remembers. Back in my cell, I dreamed of color, peeling away. Beneath the saints, the stars gleamed. Beneath the prophets, constellations roared. Beneath Adam's hand, Orion stretched eternal. When I woke, I pressed the diary to my chest. Its words had become my own confession. Paint does not sleep. I stared at the crucifix on my wall. For the first time, I wondered if even Christ's wounds had been edited. The bells rang for matins. Their chime felt false, brittle. I no longer prayed. I listened instead to the silence between the bells, to the hum inside my bones, to the ceiling above me that moved at night. And I understood. Art was not decoration. Art was control. Art was memory disguised. I am telling you this, so you will never look at the Sistine Chapel the same way again. Tilt your head, stare at the prophets, and ask yourself what else the paint remembers. Because silence wasn't sacred, it was enforced, and the paint does not sleep. The letter contained only 6 words. Tonight, if the clouds permit, descend. It was not signed, yet I knew the hand. The custodian wrote like a man chiseling stone, each letter heavy, each stroke unwilling to repent. My heart pounded as I folded the parchment. The sky had promised something rare. He had told me weeks ago. An alignment, the kind that occurs once in centuries, the kind that wakes machines older than memory. By dusk, Rome wore a strange hush. Even the tourists seemed subdued, their chatter swallowed by alleys. The bells tolled vespers, but their rhythm faltered, as if unsure of the hour. I walked quickly, cassock clinging to my legs, eyes darting for shadows that did not belong. We met beneath the chapel. The custodian carried nothing, no lamp, no book, only resolve. His silence was heavier than any torch. The vault received us like lungs long deprived. Tonight the hum was louder, urgent, vibrating through the brass ribs until dust trembled from stone. The chained books rattled faintly, their voices harmonizing into a low chant. My blood quickened. "This is the night," he whispered. "The sky will bend and the machine will wake." We descended past the shelves, past the erased saints and phantom popes, down the spiral stair to the round chamber I had glimpsed before. There it stood, the device, brass, oak, iron, part astrolabe, part sundial, part something older, wheels nested within wheels, mirrors angled toward narrow slits in the dome above, chains dangled like veins, waiting for hands to pull them. Tonight, the chamber was not empty. Candles burned in every niche, casting the machine in flickering light. And the slit in the dome glowed faintly. Through it, a star already shone, impossibly bright. The custodian touched the brass, reverent. They built it to synchronize heaven with decree. Feed it dates, it outputs prophecy. Align the stars, it rewrites history. I shivered. Prophecy machine. Not prophecy, he corrected. Editing tool. To make scripture agree with the sky, or to make the sky agree with scripture. The hum swelled. Gears began to turn, though no hand touched them. Mirrors shifted, catching the starlight, bending it into beams that crossed and merged. On the table before us, a codex waited, chained but open, its blank pages glowing faintly under the light. Lines began to appear, words written not by pen but by star. I leaned closer. The letters were Latin, sharp and deliberate. Remove Thomas from gospel. Suppress Mary. Reassign miracle to Peter. My throat closed. These were not celestial prophecies. They were instructions. Editorial notes. The machine was writing scripture. The custodian's face was grim. Now you see, they did not only erase, they fabricated. They took invention for revelation, decree for truth. The machine is their scribe, and the sky their ink. I stumbled back, shaking. The chains rattled as though mocking me. The custodian pulled another lever. The gears groaned. The mirrors shifted, aligning with another star. More words burned onto the page. Erase eclipse of 840. Insert famine. Attribute to wrath. I whispered, horrified. This is history rewritten in light. He nodded. And tonight, the alignment makes it visible. Once the stars move on, the pages will fade. That is why they guard this chamber. That is why they enforce silence. I stared at the glowing text until my eyes blurred. It was endless. Pages upon pages of edits. Saints struck out. Popes invented. Wars stretched or shortened. Feasts reassigned. Why keep records? I asked. Why not destroy them? The custodian's voice trembled. Because even lies must be catalogued. Memory is their weapon. To wield it, they must preserve the drafts. The hum deepened. The gears spun faster. The codex pages turned themselves, each one filling with light script before fading back to blank. I wanted to close it, to break the machine, to smash the mirrors and end the ritual. But the custodian placed a hand on my arm. Not yet. You must see more. Only then will you understand what you must do. Above us, the slit widened. More stars spilled in, their light weaving across brass. The chamber pulsed. The machine breathed, and I realized with dread. The ceiling above, the prophets and angels, the zodiac hidden in paint, they were all aligned to this moment. The creation of Adam pointed to Sirius not by accident, but by design. The fresco was a mask. The machine, its skeleton. The alignment had begun. The first wheel began to sing, not with music, not with melody, but with a metallic chant, the grinding of brass that fell into rhythm. The hum of the chained books above joined it, vibrating down the stairwell until the chamber itself became a throat, echoing, swallowing. My chest ached with every vibration, as though the machine had reached inside and tuned my ribs like strings. The custodian whispered, "Now watch." The codex on the table flipped another page. This time the words did not fade. They glowed steady, seared into parchment with a precision no human hand could match. Evangeliarium, Thomas, abrogandum, nomina discipulorum corrigenda, Maria tesiat. The Gospel of Thomas abolished. The names of the disciples corrected. Mary silenced. I staggered backward. They erased her, I said. They erased her voice. The custodian's jaw tightened. She was too dangerous. She taught that vision comes without hierarchy, that the divine is not mediated by Rome. They cut her out, and the machine enforced it. The gears clanked, mirrors shifted. Another page glowed. This time diagrams appeared, circles, triangles, rays of light. The instructions beneath them read, "Align prophet's gesture with constellation. Conceal in fresco. Teach obedience through art." The fresco above. My stomach twisted. The creation, the deluge, the prophets. All of it was instruction carried out by Michelangelo's trembling brush. The ceiling was not only memory, it was camouflage for edits made here in brass and light. The next page brought drawings stranger still. A chalice etched with spirals, a rod of copper topped with crystal, a lens ground into perfect curve, each one labeled not as invention, but as sancta reliquia, holy relic. "These are machines," I said, my voice cracking. "They turned inventions into relics." The custodian nodded grimly. Every discovery was sanctified, buried under the language of miracle. Telescopes became angelic eyes. Herbs became saintly intercessions. Mathematics became prophecy. To admit invention was to admit human power. So they baptized it as relic, stripped it of credit, and chained progress to altar. I turned the page. A sketch of a crude printing press stared back at me. Not labeled Gutenberg, not labeled invention only. Instrumentum Sancti Benedicti, to be kept hidden, used only under license. The hum surged. My teeth rattled. Another page filled. Erase eclipse of AD 840. Move to AD 1006. Attribute famine to wrath of God. I slammed the codex shut. The brass wheels groaned in protest, their chant faltering. "Enough!" I shouted. My voice bounced against stone, fragile, pathetic. This is not prophecy. This is tyranny. The custodian's eyes blazed. Yes, and you must see it through. If you close your eyes now, you will never understand the scale. Let it show you everything, so you will know what you must reveal. The chains above rattled violently, as if the books themselves demanded my compliance. I forced the codex open again. More words burned. Remove Feast of Sophia. Insert Cult of Agnes. Normalize miracles to match decree. Another. Create reign of Pope Severinus Minor. Insert decrees as scaffolding. Erase when no longer convenient. I whispered the erased names aloud. Sophia, Severinus. The chamber pulsed with their echoes. For a heartbeat, I thought I heard voices answer back. Faint, grieving. Then came the sound I dreaded. Footsteps. Boots on stone, descending. The custodian froze. His eyes darted to the stairwell. Shadows flickered against the wall torches. Guards. They should not be here, he hissed. The gears whined, louder now, unwilling to stop. The codex pages turned furiously, spewing edits in light. If the guards saw, all was lost. Hide, the custodian commanded. He pushed me behind the machine, pressing me into darkness. My heart thundered. The brass burned against my back, hot from starlight. 2 guards entered. Swiss guards, armor gleaming, halberds in hand. Their torches painted cruel light across the chamber. They approached the codex. One leaned down, squinting at the glowing page. "Prophecy," he murmured. The other nodded. "It writes the future still, future." My blood ran cold. They did not see edits. They saw prophecy. The lie was complete. Even the guardians believed. The machine foretold, not fabricated. The custodian bowed his head. "Brothers, you come early," the first guard sneered. "We come when told. Tonight the stars decree alignment." "We have little time," he said. "The alignment will last only hours. You must decide, will you take evidence, or will you flee with only memory?" I looked at the codex, its pages glowing, its lies endless. My hand trembled. To take even one page was treason beyond forgiveness. Yet to leave with nothing was betrayal of every erased name. "I will take it," I whispered. The custodian's eyes softened, sorrowful. "Then you will never again be safe." I reached for the codex. The brass wheels screamed, chains above rattled, the chamber roared with hum. Memory itself seemed to protest. I tore out a page. The words burned in my hand. Erase Mary. Insert Peter. Normalize. Miracle. The light dimmed, the wheels slowed, the hum fell to a growl. The codex closed itself, as though exhausted. The custodian gripped my shoulder. Now you have proof, and now you are marked. We climbed the stair in silence, carrying the stolen page. Every step echoed with danger. Behind us, the machine exhaled one final groan, as if promising it would not forgive. When we sealed the panel, dawn glimmered faintly through stained glass. The bells rang matins. Their chime was brittle, false. I pressed the glowing page against my chest. It seared, hot as iron, and I understood. I had crossed from witness to thief, from priest to heretic, from servant to rebel. Silence wasn't sacred. It was enforced, and the machine had seen me. The page seared my palm long after we sealed the panel. It was not ink anymore, it was heat, pulse, command. I wrapped it in cloth, yet still its glow seeped through, faint but insistent, as though the parchment itself was alive and unwilling to be hidden. The custodian and I climbed the stair in silence. Each step groaned too loudly, each shadow stretched too long. My ears strained for boots, for torches, for the metallic hiss of halberds. None came, yet dread marched beside us, invisible but undeniable. When we reached the nave, the custodian stopped. His eyes, always weary, were hollower than ever. "Do you understand what you carry?" he asked, voice barely breath. I nodded, though my throat was dry. He gripped my arm, harder than before. "That page is indictment. Not against one pope, not one council against centuries. If they catch you, you will not be executed. You will be erased. No record, no grave, no whisper. As if you never breathed." His words sank like lead. To die was one thing, to be unwritten was another. But even as terror gnawed at me, defiance flared. I clutched the page tighter. "Then I will not let them erase me. I will speak before they silence." The custodian closed his eyes, then released my arm with a sigh. Perhaps he saw in me the same thirst that had consumed him. We stepped into the chapel. The fresco loomed overhead, prophets and angels gazing down with painted indifference. But I thought I saw them shift again. Gemini leaning closer, Scorpio's tail curling, Virgo's eyes heavy with accusation. The ceiling seemed to watch me, as if it knew what I carried. For a heartbeat, I thought we were safe. Then the great doors thundered open. Guards spilled inside. 6, maybe more. Torches flared, halberds gleamed. Their boots struck marble with the finality of judgment. "Stop," one barked. "You will come with us." The custodian turned to me, and in that instant I understood. He would not run. His life was already forfeit. Mine was not. He stepped forward, hands raised. "I am the one you seek." The guards surged, steel rang, a blow fell. The custodian crumpled, blood painting the marble. "Run," he mouthed, "just once. Run." And I did. I tore down a side corridor, cassocks snapping around my legs, lungs burning. The page scorched my chest with every stride. Behind me, torches roared, boots thundered. The Vatican became labyrinth. Arches twisted, stairwells split, cloisters doubled back. Statues loomed from shadow like silent witnesses. I sprinted past relics, past altars, past doors carved with saints whose eyes glowed accusing in torchlight. My sandals slipped on polished stone. I slammed into a wall, gasping, then forced myself on. Shouts echoed Latin commands, harsh, practiced. They were closing in. I burst into a courtyard. Moonlight struck me like revelation, cold and merciless. Above, the alignment blazed Aries sharp, Scorpio venomous, Pisces swimming eternal. The sky itself seemed to conspire, its constellations watching like judges. The guards poured after me. Their torches painted the arches orange, their armor clattered. I ran toward the fountain at the center, legs trembling, lungs torn raw. I collapsed against the stone, clutching the page. Blood from my palm soaked the cloth. The words bled through, Mary silenced. Thomas erased. History corrected. For an instant, I considered drowning it, plunging it into the fountain, letting water smother its fire. Yet my hand refused. To destroy it would be to betray every erased name. The custodian's warning thundered in memory. Silence isn't sacred. It is enforced. I rose. My knees shook, but I lifted my chin. The guards closed in, torches high, halberds ready, their shadows stretched like claws across the courtyard. I pressed the page to my chest, hot as a brand, and whispered, not to them, not to God, but to the erased, Sophia, Severinus, Candidus, Mary, Thomas, I will not forget you. I will speak you back into memory. The guards seized me. Steel bit my throat. Hands wrenched my arms. Pain exploded across my ribs. Still I whispered names, over and over, until my voice cracked, until blood filled my mouth. They struck me silent. But silence cracked, too. As they dragged me back through corridors, my vision dimmed. Yet I clutched the page with every shred of strength. It burned hotter now, as if feeding on my defiance. I thought of the fresco above the prophets shifting in moonlight, the stars breathing through paint. I thought of the chained books, the erased saints, the phantom centuries. All of them demanded memory. All of them whispered through me. If they erased me, others would whisper. If they burned the page, memory would still pulse in cracks, in fresco, in stars. At dawn, the bells rang again. Their chime was brittle, hollow, false. I bled on the marble floor of the courtyard, dragged like refuse, yet I smiled through split lips, because I carried something stronger than bells, stronger than decrees, stronger than enforced silence. I carried memory, and memory remembers. I am writing this from a place that does not exist. That is the only way I can describe it. The cell has walls, yes, stone, damp, grooved with centuries of nails scratching for escape. The door is iron, the floor cold. But officially, on paper, in ledgers that decide who is and is not alive, this place is absent. My name has been erased, my record struck. To the Vatican, to the world, I am already dead. They have not killed me, not yet, but they have done something worse. They have made me invisible. The custodian was right. To die is final. To be erased is eternal. I know this cell was not meant for criminals. It was built for memory. Every brick is heavy with secrets the church could not burn. The mortar smells of mildew, sweat, and something older blood, perhaps. My bed is a plank, my blanket a rag. Rats scurry in cracks. But worse than the rats is the silence. Or what should have been silence. At night, when the torches outside gutter low, the silence here grows crowded. I hear the hum, The same hum that filled the vaults, that rattled the chained books, that made my bones tremble beneath the Sistine Chapel. It seeps through cracks, through stone, through breath. The hum is not absence, it is witness. At first, they questioned me. Not with fire, not with racks or screws, but with precision. A man in black robes, face unreadable, voice soft. He asked not what I saw, but what I remembered. "Do you remember the page?" he whispered. "Do you remember the names?" I lied. I said nothing. He smiled faintly, as though expecting my denial. Memory is fragile. Silence is eternal. Then he left me in dark, but they miscalculated. Silence here is not empty. Silence here is porous, leaking, saturated. Every erased name seeps into me. The first night, I dreamed of Sophia of Rome. She stood at the foot of my plank, robes torn, face radiant. She spoke prayers long forgotten, words that glowed in the air, then sank into my skin. The second night, Severinus Minor appeared. His papal ring was broken, his vestments shredded. He cursed those who erased him, his voice echoing like a second heartbeat. He did not ask for vengeance, he asked to be remembered. By the third night, the apprentice came. His hands were stained with paint, his eyes red from weeping. He whispered. The lines moved again. The saints turned into stars. Paint does not sleep. His words dripped onto the floor, pooling into shadows that swirled like constellations. These were not hallucinations. They were memories, alive, leaking through silence. The guards pass sometimes. Their boots scrape, their torches flare. They never speak. They do not need to. Their silence is doctrine. But I have learned silence cracks. Every scrape of their boots adds to the hum, becomes rhythm, becomes liturgy of the erased. Days blur, or perhaps they do not. Time is treacherous here, the bells ring above, but I no longer trust them. Are they matins, vespers, lauds, or inventions, like the phantom centuries scrawled in the chained books? Once they dragged me from the cell to the interrogation chamber. A single chair, a single table, a crucifix on the wall. The man in black sat opposite, hands folded neatly. He asked again, soft, almost kind, "Do you remember the page?" I shook my head. He leaned closer. "Do you remember the names?" Again I denied. His lips curled. "Memory is a burden, child. Silence is mercy. We offer you mercy." But mercy was the wrong word. Mercy would have been death. This was erasure. They returned me to the cell. I thought I was alone. But the voices proved otherwise. Sophia prayed. Severinus cursed. The apprentice painted the walls with constellations that glimmered, then vanished. Even the custodian came once. Or perhaps it was dream. He stood in the corner, face pale, eyes burning. "You carry the page still," he said. "Even if they tore it away, it burns in you. Memory cannot be confiscated." I woke with my palm bleeding, though no blade had touched it. The scar of the stolen page had branded itself deeper. The hum grows louder with each night. Sometimes it shakes the plank I sleep on. Sometimes it rattles the iron door. I press my ear to stone and hear entire centuries chanting 614 to 911, the phantom years, erased yet insistent. Their voices overlap, a tide of time refusing to be silent. They wanted to unmake me here, but instead they remade me. I am no longer priest, no longer servant, no longer erased. I am witness. And witnesses, once they speak, cannot be unsaid. If these words reach you, beyond this cell, beyond these walls, know this: I was not supposed to survive. My silence was supposed to be eternal. Yet here I am, smuggling confession through cracks, whispering across centuries. Because silence isn't sacred. It is enforced. And memory bleeds through stone. They do not torture me with fire. They torture me with silence. Every interrogation begins the same. I am dragged from my cell, wrists raw against iron, into a chamber bare but for a chair, a table, and a crucifix. The man in black sits, waiting, hands folded, eyes calm. He speaks gently, as though hearing confession. Do you remember the page? I answer nothing. Do you remember the names? I keep my silence. Then he smiles faintly, as if pleased. Good. Memory is fragile. Silence is eternal. And they return me to the cell. At first, I thought this was mercy, that they sought only to frighten me, not break me. But days bled into nights, nights into days, and I understood. Silence itself is the punishment. Here, silence gnaws deeper than any blade. Here, silence unthreads memory until even one's own name begins to unravel. But I will not let mine unravel. I force myself to recite names aloud, whispering into stone so memory does not decay. Sophia, Severinus, Candidus, Mary, Thomas, over and over, until my throat cracks, until blood tastes of iron. The guards believe I pray. They are wrong. I am keeping memory alive. Once they brought another prisoner past my door. A flicker of torchlight revealed his face, gaunt, hollow, terrified. He looked at me through bars, and I saw recognition. His lips formed a word, Sophia. Then the guards struck him silent and dragged him away. I never saw him again. Days later, his cell stood open, empty. No record remained of him, erased, yet his whisper clings in me still. This is their method, not executions, not pyres. Erasure. They dissolve lives until nothing lingers. But memory resists. Memory seeps through cracks. The vaults rise in me each night. I see chained books rattling, their hum echoing in my ribs. I see erased saints screaming in red ink, crosses gouged across their names. I see phantom centuries piling upon each other like bones. I see the fresco writhing, angels turning into constellations under moonlight. And I see the prophecy machine breathing in brass, wheels spinning, mirrors bending starlight into edits. I remember the page burning in my hand, Mary silenced, Thomas erased, history corrected. They want me to forget, but I will not. The interrogator shifts tactics sometimes. He asks of miracles. Tell me, did you not witness loaves multiplied, wine transfigured, saints glowing? I answer nothing. He leans close. They were miracles, were they not? Not tricks, not optics, not chemistry. And I remember the Jesuit margins, miraculum per artem opticam. Miracle by optical art. The Inquisition records coerce confession to align with canon. The Rosicrucian notes, herbs turned into apparitions, science baptized into miracle, then chained as relic. I almost laugh. But laughter here is dangerous. The interrogator waits. You doubt miracles? No, I rasp finally. I doubt silence. His smile fades. He signals the guards. I am dragged back to the cell. Nights grow heavier. Sometimes I hear screams in corridors, short, strangled, quickly silenced. Other times I hear nothing at all, which is worse. The absence is louder than any cry. I have begun to see shadows in my cell that do not belong. At first, I thought madness, but then I recognized them. The erased. Sophia kneels at the corner, her lips moving in prayer. Severinus stands tall, his broken papal ring glinting faintly. The apprentice smears pigment across the wall, lines shifting into constellations. The custodian, pale, watches me with sorrow. They do not speak. They do not need to. Their silence is fuller than speech. They press memory into me, making me vessel. Some nights I feel their weight upon my chest, their breath in my ear, their whispers threading into my veins. Remember us, speak us, do not let silence win. I wake shaking, drenched in sweat. Yet even then I smile, because I know I am not alone. The Vatican can erase records. It cannot erase witnesses. And I am witness. I replay the vaults in my mind, building them brick by brick. The chained shelves humming like bees, the brass ribs inscribed with planetary hours, the erased saints gouged in ledgers, the maps stretched into lies, the fresco bleeding constellations, the prophecy machine scripting scripture in starlight. Every detail I carve into myself. If they kill me, my corpse will rot with memory intact. And perhaps, when they bury me nameless, memory will seep from my bones into the soil, whispering into roots, into water, into air. I understand now why the custodian chose me. Not because I was holy, not because I was strong, but because I was thirsty. And thirst cannot be silenced. The guards think I weaken. They see my body shrink, my beard grow ragged, my skin pale. They believe silence is winning. But silence is not victory. Silence is evidence of fear. Each day they come, asking the same. Do you remember the page? Yes. Do you remember the names? Yes. I tell them nothing. But inside, I repeat every letter, every erased syllable, memory stronger with each denial. I have decided, if I do not leave this place alive, I will leave it as witness. My words will find cracks, will seep through guards, will ride the hum itself. Someone will hear, someone always hears. This, then, is my testament, my confession, my indictment, my gift. The Vatican wanted silence. Instead, they gave me echo, and echoes grow. They came for me again tonight. The same chamber, the same crucifix, the same table that smelled of old ink and iron. But the air was different, thicker, colder, like the breath of centuries pressing down. The man in black sat waiting. His eyes gleamed in torchlight, unreadable, unbreakable. He did not whisper his usual questions. He did not ask of pages or names. He leaned forward, hands folded, and spoke only one sentence. You will not be remembered. For a moment, silence thundered, and then I laughed. It was broken, raw, cracked through pain, but it was laughter, because I understood, at last. They feared me not for what I carried, but for what I might leave behind. I told him nothing. Yet in my mind, memory shouted louder than bells. They dragged me back to the cell. The door slammed. Darkness fell, and memory rose. The wall before me rippled like water. For a heartbeat, I thought madness had claimed me. But then the shapes formed. Sophia of Rome appeared, halo faint, lips moving in forgotten prayers. Her eyes burned with sorrow, but her voice was steady. Do not let them erase me again. Next came Severinus Minor, papal ring broken, crown cracked. He placed the shattered circlet in my hands. They denied my reign, he growled, but I walked. I spoke, I bled. Speak me back. ADI. Dust. The apprentice shuffled forward, his hands dripping paint that glowed faintly, lines crawling across stone into constellations. The figures moved again, he whispered. They will not sleep. Do not let them. And then, last, the custodian, his robe torn, his eyes hollow, but his voice a command. You are vessel now. What we carried, you must scatter. Memory cannot remain buried. Memory must infect. Their voices braided into one, a chorus of the erased. The hum of the chained books rose from the cracks, rattling through the floor, shaking the plank I sat on. I pressed my bleeding palm against the stone and felt the vibration pulse into me. I see everything again now. The chained vaults humming like organs, the saints slashed in red, their feast days abolished, the phantom centuries hammered into brass plaques, the fresco above, writhing under moonlight, prophets twisting into stars, the prophecy machine scripting scripture in starlight, its wheels grinding history into lies. I see the page burning, Mary silenced, Thomas erased, history corrected. And I know I cannot carry this alone. I cannot escape this cell. But I can scatter memory. You, yes, you who hear these words now, you are my escape. Listen. The Vatican did not merely guard faith, it rewrote it. It did not merely preserve memory, it forged it. It did not merely silence dissent, it manufactured silence. They chained books, they burned gospels, they erased saints, they invented popes, they inserted centuries that never existed, they baptized inventions as relics, they turned the sky into a ledger and bent time to decree. And all of it was hidden in plain sight, painted into beauty, buried under bells, disguised as miracles. You must not forget this. Do not believe the bells. Their rhythm is counterfeit. Do not trust the calendar. Its centuries are counterfeit. Do not look at the Sistine ceiling without suspicion. Beauty there is camouflage. Instead, listen for hums. Watch cracks, trace shadows, the erased whisper through fractures. You must speak the names they killed: Sophia, Severinus, Candidus, Mary, Thomas. Whisper them when you wake. Murmur them when you pray. Shout them if you dare. Memory needs tongues. Memory needs breath. Because the most dangerous thing to them is not heresy, it is not rebellion, it is not even truth. The most dangerous thing to them is memory returning. I know my fate. Soon the guards will come, perhaps tonight, perhaps tomorrow. They will drag me out, strip me, blot my name from ledgers, and dispose of me where no pilgrim will kneel. They will make me absent. But absence is not nothing. Absence is memory denied. And denied memory returns sharper, hungrier. I will be erased. but you will remember. I will fall silent, but you will speak. I will vanish, but echoes multiply. So I leave you this final charge. When you look into the Sistine ceiling, do not see prophets, see constellations. When you hear bells, do not hear hours, hear edits. When you read scripture, do not accept, search margins for scars. Become archive, become witness. Do not bow to silence. Whisper louder. Silence isn't sacred, it is enforced. And memory remembers.